Terri Binion, and you're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Terri Binion, thank you so
Hi.
much for taking the time to connect.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. As you know, our friend Jim White connected us. He's a big fan of yours, and he urged me to listen to your music and get a hold of you, and I'm so glad he did. But I've had some trouble finding much information about you, so I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. Uh,
Cool.
maybe let's see, you're in Florida, is that right?
I am. I've been here for 43 years now.
So you moved there when you were 1 years old?
A little older than that. I
And
was driving my own car at the time.
yeah, what part of Florida are you in?
I'm in Orlando.
Orlando. That
Yeah.
must be a trip living in Orlando.
Well, I came here in 1982. I was 22 years old. I was aimless. I didn't have a formal education. And I knew that I needed to leave my hometown. I did move around quite a bit with my family, my father being in the military. Um, but I knew that I had to flee. And so I came here after I had visited one time. I had actually visited here and I had visited Tucson, Arizona. Each of these places I had some connections. And I knew as soon as I got back home to North Carolina that this was going to be the spot. Even in 1982, it just felt like there was a lot of opportunity, and I needed to get my life rolling.
You know, it's interesting. North Carolina is a great place to be for a songwriter, but
Yeah,
you knew you had to flee.
yeah. I had moved around already so much in my life, and I had lived in places, one in particular that I was far greater attached to than my hometown of Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is home to Camp Lejeune, which, is its own sort of specific thing and its own specific sort of culture. So this was a good choice. I mean, 43 years invested. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that about that. You just the little I know about you, you've had a fascinating career. You first record you put out was 1996, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you put out Fool in 2001, which was highly acclaimed, and then you seem to have kind of taken a hiatus. And I know you put a record out in 2016, and you put a few singles out in the last few years. But am I correct that you have a new record coming out sometime soon?
Well, I'm recording music right now. I'm trying to get at least some singles recorded before I leave Orlando. I'm planning to put the house up for sale in the spring, and I'm trying to not necessarily create a record, an official uh, record with a title, but I plan to record with as many friends as I can
Mhm.
before I leave town.
So you're moving? You're leaving Orlando?
I am. I'm hoping to. I hope that, I have a swift and fortunate sale of my home. And then I know you're going to ask me, so I'm just going to tell you I'm moving to Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it checks off a lot of boxes.
What's in Charleston that is bringing you there?
Well, I have a gaggle of family there, mostly my brother's children and his wife. My brother deceased. I'm sorry, died in 2020, and I I have a sister who lives in rural Virginia, and I've been looking there too. But there's a lot more real estate in Charleston, and it's affordable living. I can be both in the country and the city at the same time. There's 2 major universities, there's 2 major hospitals. And I have my brother's family and all of their, all of the children and the children that are coming in the near future, I'm sure. And it's just time. I'm 65. I'm not really ready to retire, but I'm ready to get out of Florida. I'm hoping that this will be my last hurricane season.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I've talked this to a number of guests, and I make music too as well. Um, it it does seem like it's so much easier to just put out singles now. And I lament the fact that a lot of folks are not even putting out albums anymore because a lot of the listening public don't care. And there was a time, like I'm similar age to you. I'm actually 68, but we grew up at a time when we would buy an album, save our money, very carefully choose the album we bought, bring it home, take the shrink out wrap off, and consume that whole thing, the artwork, the lyrics, with the headphones on, listening to it over and over, and thinking about the sequencing. And I know the artists thinking about the sequencing of the record, and even if it wasn't a concept record, that seems to be gone now, or at least it's dying. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
I'm just glad to hear you say it again. You know what I mean? It takes the pressure off. It saves a lot of money. And while you talk about this, I'm thinking, by the time I get up to Charleston, I'm probably just going to do a lot of live, recordings, like go online live.
Mhm.
And who knows? I mean, it's more like TikTok, I guess,
Yeah.
that, it might actually be more of a reward to do it that way.
Mm.
People ask me if I have any vinyl, and like, I can't really, there's no reason for me to do that. I mean, I would press enough just to give to my greatest vinyl collecting friends right here in Orlando as a gift. But
And that would
um,
not be cost effective at all. You got to
yeah,
print 400 or 500 of those to make any sense, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
right now, I've been lucky enough to be selling out shows in Orlando, in particular venues.
Mhm.
And so every time I just load up the tables with free CDs. I'm just giving them my CDs for being there, for having bought a ticket.
It's,
And they like that. They
yeah.
like People like free stuff.
Yeah.
And they also just like that you did that for them.
Nice.
It's a gift for me to be able to just know that maybe because I gave it to them, they'll go home and listen to it and pass it on to somebody else. And uh, but I still have quite a few CDs to get rid of before I load the truck and head north.
I do the same thing, Terry, and I'm sure, like me, you occasionally will have someone say, I'll take one of the CDs, or when I do sell them, I'll buy one of your CDs, but I don't have a CD player. I'll do it to support you and to have something tangible. But CDs seem to be a dying thing, especially most cars today don't even have a CD player in them.
I know someone says that every show. Oh, I would love to have one, but I don't have a player anymore.
Yeah.
I love to listen in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's back up. I want to hear, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about, what you were like as a kid, and how you got into music. One thing I want to ask you, though, before you get into that, my my impression from Jim, talking to Jim about you, and by the way, he called Fool one of his top 10 records of all time, which is and it's a really fine record. I've been listening to it myself, and I also want to hear how Lucinda got involved in that. But let me ask you one question before we jump into all that. Jim at least led me with the impression that after that record came out and it was highly acclaimed, that you sort of got burned out by the music industry and you kind of walked away from it. Is that true? And if so, what was that like?
Okay, well, I'll start with that answer. I did, um, I suppose I went here's what happened is I suddenly was in the music industry with my first record. And I was in no ways prepared because I had not been playing like I was aiming for the record industry. I was in another industry by then. I don't want to make this a long story, but when I made my first record, I had been urged to make it by someone that had a studio. And next thing I knew, I was being asked to come to New York. I was assigned to a distribution label. I was out on the road touring basically by myself and not making any money. And I I I wore that record out. Like I worked it for 3 years and I was broke and I had a mortgage because I was 38 years old. I wasn't 24 years old or 27 years old.
Yeah.
So so years later I made the second record because I have music in me. The record industry doesn't want me and I don't know how to do it apparently. And it's more than just being a good songwriter. Everyone, I suppose, knows this. Um, um, so when I made the second record several years later, and I don't just keep recording everything I write. I don't record everything I write, and I don't release everything I record. So um, when I made my second record, another thing happened. Lucinda had an appearance on the record, and I got invited to go over to Europe. So instead of touring here in the States, I went over to Holland. And while I was in Holland, I went to Belgium and I went to Germany and I went over to London. Um, but when I came home, you know, I just went back to work at my other career. And, I lost cars. I lost a car in a fire. I went broke. Um, I screwed up a lot of times. I got depressed about it. My ego probably just went crazy just trying to protect myself. And eventually, um, you know, other stuff happened. And later on, there was, so like moving now towards my third record, there was, I experienced trauma like I never had in my life. And so I continued writing music and I was, I sold a house. So then I had money to record a third record. And, all that did was afford me, some healing. I was doing a lot of healing on my own. I'm still healing. Um, but then I was just, my psyche was clear and my spirit was revived. And I went out on a friends and family tour up around Appalachia with that record. And, and that was 2016. And, now it's 2025. And,
Wait a
I have
second. Wait a second. It's 2024. They'll get you.
2024. Oh my God, that happens all the time. So here I am now, and I have a new plan, for myself where I will go and age out. And I'm happy. I'm settled. I'm just happy to make music.
Yeah.
I'm happy that I'm still writing songs. I think I'm as good a songwriter as I've ever been. I still love the process.
Mm.
And I did pull out of the industry. I mean, I needed to. I didn't go into this, like I said, prepared. It was only in my dreams as a young person. Like, I've been writing since I was 11 years old. And I've said this a couple times recently, and it took me my whole life to kind of realize it. But like a lot of people, when I laid down and daydreamed, or at night when I was listening to my cassette player in the bed, I wanted to do that. But then that quickly just like went to sleep like a dream. I already knew as a young person that will never happen to me.
Wow.
But it didn't stop me from writing songs.
And so for
So,
all that, the last however many years, even though you've not been consistently recording or putting out records, you have been writing.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I only write. I don't. I'm not disciplined. Sometimes I practice discipline because I get this energy to do it. But mostly, I write when the muse comes.
Yeah. You just reminded me of something really interesting. A friend of mine said recently, he just started writing music a few years ago. He's maybe in his third or fourth year, and he's writing some just gorgeous songs. And I said to him, just kind of off the cuff, I said, you've progressed so quickly. If you keep improving your songwriting, you're you could probably make it if you want to, and in this industry. And he said, John, why the hell would I want to do that and fuck up my life? In other words, my life is great right now. And I love writing music and playing gigs. And sure, I'm going to record music and I'm going to try to do a little something with it. But do I want to make it in some way? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody can handle it, you know?
Or would want to deal with all that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess every artist that we look at um, is has got a whole different uh, physical thing going on, mental thing going
Sure.
on, how they're on the daily, how they're
Yeah.
dealing with it and with their life and with their family. And anyways, I'm just grateful to still be alive because I, I could have, I just didn't think that I would live this long.
Mm,
Yeah.
mhm. Well, I'm glad you're alive too. Your music is gorgeous, and I've been immersing myself in Fool. I hate to be that guy that says I like your old stuff, because I'm sure I'm gonna like your stuff you haven't released yet too. But that record, start to
Yeah.
finish, is so good. How did the Lucinda thing come about? That connection? She appeared on that one song.
Um, during the time I was um, getting around during the period of my first record, Leaving This Town, I was in Nashville and taking, I'd been given some meeting spots with writers and labels and all that stuff. And I was playing this songwriter thing. I think it wasn't Third and Lindsley, but it was up on like Broadway and Second, somewhere near the Ryman. There was a venue there. But um, Joylyn White and I were on the same panel there. And we got to talking. She was coming to Orlando. She said, I've got to come, I don't know if she asked or if I invited her to stay at my place. And so this is like back in the 90s.
Mhm.
So Joyland said, we were both obviously Lucinda fans. I don't know how we came upon that, but she said, I can give you your record to Lucinda. I said, wow, that's amazing. And Lucinda then, maybe she is still this way. It's been a little bit since we lost contact, since when she moved to LA and when she got married. We kind of lost contact, but she sent me a letter, you know, after listening to the record, and she kept the letters coming. I got on her greeting card. I was on her greeting card list, and she would send me gifts. I think she did that from the back of her bus. That was her way, because she told me once she doesn't get off the bus. So, you know, I think she did a lot of that. Like, she had a lot of mail going out of that bus to a lot of people, I'm sure. So
But still, how special, you know?
yeah, you know, so gosh, I had her phone number. So I called her up and sent her all the tracks for Fool and just gave her her pick. You pick whatever you want. And she picked Gale Ann, which is an interesting story in
Mhm.
itself. Yeah. So you were asking me, I think, about my childhood, how I was as a child.
Yeah, what were you like as a kid?
I was listening to Ron Rash's episode on your show,
Mhm.
and I was so relating to him about being an introvert, about not doing so great in school. Those were my things because I was moving around with my dad, who was a Marine.
Mm.
And there were some good years. When I moved to California, when I moved to Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, California, everything was groovy. That was back in 1969. I was 9 years old. For some reason in California, it was so different going to public school. But when I was east in Jacksonville, North Carolina, home of Camp Lejeune, man, oh man, it was like, I, I mean, I was in one place for 4 grades, but every year I just felt like the new kid in school. And for some reason, I was being picked on, and I hated it. Um, so I didn't do well in school. I realized late in life that I was carrying some of my mother's fear about being a military wife, and my father was gone to Korea and Vietnam. And then later, I realized in a sort of, I realized late in life that when I was a child, I had a learning disability. And my learning disability, I think, came from my fear. And I think it came from being bullied in school. It came also from the fact that my father was not at home and my mother was at home just doing the best she could. But by the time I entered first grade, I had not gone to kindergarten, I had not gone to pre-K, and I wasn't being taught at home letters and numbers, and I wasn't being read to, and I wasn't reading, I wasn't being taught to read. So when I went to first grade, first day of school ever, there it started. Um, there were certain things that I understood. I mean, I excelled in language up to a certain point. Um, but so as a child, I was like that, and I was like Ron. I was outside. I was fascinated by nature, and I also noticed that the sound of his stories sounded like my stories. I started to write short stories during the pandemic, and I am very much um, I'm always setting the scene in my stories and in my songs. I put the listener in the place where they can see and hear and feel something. So I was always before I got into school, I remember we lived on a place called Hall's Run in Verona, North Carolina, in the country outside of Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I would just disappear into the woods Nobody was worried. My brother and sister were in school. My mother was inside sewing or cooking. And I remember vividly the line of the woods and the things that I found on the ground.
Mm.
Um, and I suppose always trying to be aware of where the house was so that I knew how to get back. And I did this also in the desert. So in '69, when we moved to the desert, it was like we had driven up to a movie set. It was like the great Western movies, and it was our playground. And on weekends, it was what to do was just to pack a peanut butter sandwich and fill a canteen with water and just go off into the desert. And I probably did that. When I wasn't at home listening to records, I was walking around the desert or riding my bicycle like a mad girl.
Were you also a reader? I'm guessing.
I wasn't much of a reader because it just wasn't happening. But there were certain books that I would open up to. Like there was a Britannica set of encyclopedias and
Mm.
children's stories. And I remember being drawn to the artwork. And sometimes I had like certain pictures in that whole stack of books that I wanted to look at. And I would just go to that page and I'd go into that. Like I was just staring at it, like with eyes wide open. It was either like scary, or it was delightful. It was the
Mhm.
colors. I love illustration because of having looked at it that way when I was a kid.
I had that similar experience with National Geographics that were around the house. I can remember looking at some of those photos and
Oh yeah.
just being completely captivated. I passed over a really interesting statement you made. And let's come back to it. You said you rode your bicycle, would you say like a mad girl?
Yeah. I was going to say like a mad woman, but I wasn't a woman.
I think there's a song in there, Terry.
Yeah. Well, there was freedom in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We had a water tower, um, like a cistern up on a sand dune that had been created for that cistern to sit on.
Mhm.
And we would walk our bikes. Like it was huge, but I was looking at it through the eyes of a child, but I think that it's still pretty big. And we'd get to the top of that and just kind of like hang out for a little bit, probably eat our peanut butter sandwich. And then we would let ourselves roll down that gravelly hill.
Mhm.
And yeah, there was just freedom in that. I haven't forgotten that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that behind you? Is that Bob Dylan? Is that
It
a portrait?
is. It
Pardon
is.
me? Did you do that?
No, I didn't do that. I wish I was such an artist. I love to dabble in it.
Yeah.
That's Brittany Schweitzer, a local artist who just dabbles in art, but she's that good.
Wow. I I haven't done this recently, but for probably the first 30 episodes of this series, I always ask my guests about Dylan because and what their experience was with Bob, and because he was such a profound influence on me. And I think that most people don't recognize not only the influence he had on us as songwriters and on music, but just the culture itself in a lot of ways too. What has been your experience with Dylan? What was it like early? What do you think about him now? What are your thoughts about the Bob?
Well, early on, I was born in 1959, so I was not a child of the 50s. I was a little kid in the 60s. I was little in the 60s. Um, in 69, I was 9 and turning 10 when we moved to California. And of course, I was hearing Bob Dylan. Um, but as a little kid, I wasn't attracted to his voice. And I knew I knew that his content was, you know, like that it was, you know, what it was leaning towards, but he is like, you know, there's such a masquerade going on, like all of the, so many times when he's talking about a political figure, it's masked, you know, in another name. Um, so I couldn't follow that for the longest time, but all of my life, I know that I need to go in and listen. And I still haven't heard his whole entire collection. I still haven't. As far as I know, I haven't heard the whole collection. And I've been more attracted to records written in the last 20 years.
Mm.
But I try to listen to everything. I wrote a song called Whatever Happened Between Richard Payne and Burton Post.
Yes.
That was on Fool.
Yes.
And I knew when I happened upon that subject that I knew that I wanted to write about. It just came in, you know, I don't know if the muse stepped in first or if I was just, you know, just inspired by something that I had seen. I was searching for a record cover. I was searching for record cover art when I happened upon that story that's inside the song. But I said to myself, I need to know, I need to learn right now how to put this entire story in 6 or 7 verses. And I went to Bob Dylan's song, Hurricane, and I listened to it over and over and over and over again to learn how to say just the right words that keep propelling your story forward, like in a sentence, one sentence at a time, like keep moving it forward. I realized that. I realized that that's what he was doing in that song. And I thought, I need to go deep inside and learn how to put a motor on this. And that's what he means to me.
And that's a lot. Yeah.
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 I've seen him three times now. I've seen him 3 times now. And, you know, late. The first time I saw him, I think it was 2005. 3 times right here in Orlando.
How about John Prine? Did he mean much to you?
Let's see. I probably first heard John Prine in the later 70s when I moved to Athens, Ohio. I got turned on to a lot of music. That's when I first heard Emmylou Harris and Bonnie Raitt, and Tom Rush. So many people. Ellen McElwain. Are you hip to Ellen McElwain?
I'm not.
You might want to look into her. She's got a soulful thing going on. But I have to admit that I sort of turned on to John Prine sort of gradually. And I think there was a time when, like, between vinyls and CDs and just the distraction of life, getting my own life going, I stepped away from music a lot because I was distracted by trying to make a living. And I wasn't affording myself, you know, vinyl and CDs and what have you. But I appreciate him greatly. He's the guy.
Yeah, he's the greatest.
Yeah.
And so who are some of the names that you think of when you get that cliche question? Who have been your musical influences? Who, whether directly or indirectly, had an impact on you? Who do you typically list?
Well, starting really young, it was Glenn Campbell. Those were my dad's records. Um, and what is the writer's name? Jimmy Webb. Jimmy Webb songs on those records. I listened to Joni Mitchell, Roberta Flack, Carole King. I listened to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Was a big Neil Young fan.
Yeah.
I loved the sounds of like the Everly Brothers. I loved Elvis Presley. I loved the Beatles. And all these people you don't hear in my music, but it was, you know, and later, you know, it's like Cat Stevens and gosh, so many, you know, thank God. I love 70s music. I really do. And I love it still. I just watched Immediate Family. Have you seen that movie by the same guy that made Wrecking Crew, I mean? Oh my God. Yeah. Watch this. But yeah, it was folk and country. You know, it was Creedence Clearwater.
Sure.
It was acoustic guitar music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jackson Browne.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about your songwriting process. Does it vary? Is it fairly typical? I know you said you typically don't have that. I was always blown away. I heard an interview with Guy Clark once, and he said that he didn't sit around and wait for the muse. He had an office. He went to the office like it was his job, and he sat on the couch and forced himself to write songs. I've never been that way myself, and it sounds like you're not really that person either. What is the songwriting process like for you?
Well, sometimes I might just be in the mood to play my guitar. And sometimes it'll start there. That's happened before. Just like something, it's like a fish that comes to the line, like right now. Sometimes I make myself sit and write lyrics. Sometimes I sit down and make myself find a progression. And then other times it just comes. And other times, like recently, I had like a set of lyrics over here with a progression that I had pulled out from the past and was trying to work those two things together. And then over here, I had a set of lyrics, but I didn't have music for. Maybe I had some kind of music for it. And then all of a sudden, this chord progression came and replaced this chord progression. And then that became the song. I guess it can run any which way, any way. I don't have a discipline.
What song? If here's a kind of an interesting question. If Bob Dylan came to your door and said that he's heard about you, and he hasn't heard your music, but he's heard about you, and he wants to hear one of your songs. Please play me one of your songs, Terri. What would you play him?
That's tough, but maybe I would play a newer song that's called The Sound of My Undoing. I don't know why.
Great title.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Great
We're working on that one right now. But maybe I think that maybe he would just appreciate the lyrical journey in it. Yeah.
Which one of your songs do you always play at a gig? Or are there more than one that you always play at a gig?
Well, a handful of them get played at every gig because I guess I don't have 200 songs to choose from.
Yeah.
Um, you know, some are more like deep cuts that don't get, like whatever happened between Richard Payne and Burton Post
Yeah.
doesn't get played at gigs.
Oh, really? Why
Yeah,
is it?
it doesn't. Well, you know, I don't think that if it's just a gig, people's attention span is not there.
Uh-huh.
But I would consider playing that at my next concert.
Uh-huh.
And I
Have a
need to think about that. I need to think about pulling that up into
more of
into, into the
more of a
rehearsal track.
listening room environment, you would consider that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, Jim told me that one of my songs reminds him of that song of yours, which was quite a compliment for me. Uh, but
Which song? Which
the
song is it
whatever
remind?
happened between Richard Payne
Oh,
and Burton Post
oh,
told
okay.
he told me that song of yours reminded me of a song of mine. But
Okay,
anyway,
cool.
do you have an opening song that you like, that you say I like to open my gigs with this song, or does it change every time?
Sometimes a lot of times, like at gigs, I'll open, or like just recently I opened the second set uh, with the song These Days, which is on the day after the night before. Sometimes I play that the way it's recorded, sort of bouncy like, and then other times I play it as a ballad, slowed down,
Mm,
as like the sound check song.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's see. I have a lot more questions, but we don't have too much more time. I like to keep these things at about 45 minutes. So let's kind of start wrapping up. What any good gig stories? I know it's varied a lot, but any funny gig stories in the many years you've been playing gigs? Anything come to mind of?
Well, you know, I can. The first thing that comes to mind, it's a kind of a fabulous thing. It's not necessarily funny. Um, there were two things really. There's a story when I played the Ryman, and there's a story when I on one of the gigs I played at the Bottom Line in New York. Um, I'll try to make these short. When I played the Ryman, it was like 1996. I was out with the Indigo Girls, and they were sound checking, and I was like backstage right. There's a security woman by the name of Rose who's sitting at a table, and I come up to her. I'm just kind of stalling before I go on for my sound check. She says, "Terri, have you seen Patsy today?" And I said, I'm sorry. What was that?" She said, "Have you seen Patsy today?" And I said, "Patsy who?" She said, "Patsy Cline." And I started to think about this road show that was on tour right at that time. The Patsy Cline show was on tour. I said, she said to me, I said, I haven't seen Patsy Cline. She said, "Well, you're in her dressing room." And when she said that, like my equilibrium just went bonkers, and I felt somebody pushed my shoulder, and I leaned forward into her little table there. It was like, I said, "Rose, I, I think, well, maybe I did bump into her." And I was just blown away.
Yeah.
I was just blown away. Those were things that happened back in the 90s, things that just happened. And I just couldn't believe what was happening to me, because one minute I was just sitting right here,
Yes.
and next thing I knew, I was there. Another time, I had been invited when the record came out, and it ended up getting mastered up in New Jersey, and that's when Vince Scelsa walked into this studio in New Jersey, and that's the person, Vince Scelsa from Idiot's Delight in New York City, that ended up calling me and asking me to come to New York City. But so I went to the Bottom Line three times, and one time we were there to celebrate Vince Scelsa's 50th birthday and his 30th year in radio. And all kinds of people were being invited. I didn't know who. And I had gotten there the night before, and I treated myself to a night in the Chelsea Hotel. And when I woke up that morning, a voice said, "You're going to have the rock and roll experience of your lifetime." And I've heard these voices throughout my life randomly. And when I got to my sound check, Lou Reed was on stage. I had no idea who was going to be there, and the room was full of people, including Jimmy Webb, and just a ton more people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We could probably
So
we could probably do an entire episode of the experiences you had in the 90s.
I suppose, you know what? Everybody's experiences.
Yeah.
Honestly, we're
Yeah.
all living extraordinary lives, extraordinary. And if we're surviving, then we have stories to tell. And
Amen.
hopefully, we're all growing bolder and wiser with every passing day.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Just one or two more questions, Terri. What is your other career? What is it that you do outside of music?
When I moved here in 1982, I had moved here from North Carolina, where I had been working in a sewing factory during the day and a bar at night. And I took my limited sewing factory experience over to Walt Disney World and got into an interview with the head tailor in the creative costuming department there. It's 1982. And he was kind enough to say to me, "Terri, your experience is somewhat limited compared to the things that we build here, but they're looking for dressers right next door." And so I became a backstage dresser for
Mm.
the performers. And that also got me a union card, an IATSE union card, International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. And I've been a union member since 1982. So after about 7 years at Disney, I went into television and film because it was rolling into town. And I've also spent all this time also dressing our Broadway shows here at our Performance Arts Center at the Dr. Phillips and the old Bob Carr.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. My 24-year-old daughter is living in New York with an agent auditioning. All she's done her entire life is musical theater, all she's ever wanted to do, and very proud of her for heading to New York after college and making it come true.
Nice.
Let's see. This is a little bit of a personal question. You can obviously refuse to answer it, but do you have any particular guiding philosophy or spirituality that you lean on?
I do. I do. I lean into all that I'm grateful for um, when I'm not feeling good, and I turn it around.
Mhm.
I pick myself up. I lean into being here now and living in the present, that the past is already lived and the future is not yet here. And I should work harder at leaning into, but what can you do today so that you can do what you want to do in the future? Like make a short list of um, things to prepare.
Mhm.
Um, and I try to live by meeting people where they are. And that means to don't just assume things about people. Assume that they've had tragedy or that they might be having a bad day. Um, Assume that you're both just human.
Very wise. Terri, thank you so much for doing this. I hope I get an opportunity to sometime to see you perform. I get to travel a little bit. I'm going to start paying attention and see if I can maybe make it sometime to see you one of your gigs. I will put your website link in the show notes to this. Is there anything else that you would like to say, or anything that you would like me to put in those show notes, or anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Uh, I can't think of anything. I'm just really grateful.
Yeah. Beautiful. Terri Binion, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
I hope our paths meet again down the road sometime.
Me too, John. Thank you so much.
Take care.